Hello, welcome back to my channel, and look what I have finally got my hands on. This is the Kuretake Gansai Tambi Art Nouveau set of watercolour paints. And I'm pretty late to the party where these paints are concerned, because it feels like every artist and illustrator that I follow on social media has these paints. And I've wanted them ever since they were first released about 4 years ago. In this video, I'm going to swatch out these colours. I'll explain why it's taken me so long to get my hands on them, and I'll put to the test a few of the things that I hear said about the paints, which may or may not be true. Look at this range of colours, it's so beautiful. I mean, you can see the sort of vintage inspiration here. It's a really lovely range of colours, and there's something so satisfying about them when they're untouched and they're so smooth. I kind of want to lick them. I don't even eat sweets, but I want to eat those. Right, I'm just going to start swatching out these colours, and as I do, I will talk a little bit about the paints. I'm just going to use this fine grain heavyweight paper, which isn't a watercolour paper, but it's 200 GSM, and it's fine for swatching on, and it's quite a white paper, so it'll be a nice way to see these colours as they really are. So this Art Nouveau range of colours was initially brought out, I think it was 2022, and I believe it was originally meant to be a limited edition set of colours, but it was incredibly popular. It sold out very quickly, and so now it's been brought back and is a regular sort of fixture in Kuretake's colour range. So these paints are sometimes referred to as Japanese watercolours, as opposed to the sort of traditional or Western watercolours like Winsor & Newton or Daniel Smith. But they're not really watercolours as such. They're sometimes described as being a cross between a watercolour and a gouache paint. I don't think that's a very accurate description either. They're all water-soluble paints. Watercolours are more transparent, gouache is more opaque, and then these are sort of in between, but all three of them are their own thing with their own characteristics. So I think the reason people say that these behave a little bit like gouache sometimes is because you can use lighter colours on top of darker ones, because they have enough opacity to do that. But the binders that are used in them are completely different. Gouache is quite a chalky paint. It dries with a matte, almost sort of chalky finish, whereas these, I don't really know how to describe the texture. They're more, I don't know, gummy or tacky or something like that. And if you use them very heavily, very thickly, what am I trying to say? If you use them very heavily, not too watered down, they can dry with a bit of a shine to them as well. That's very pale, that one. So I fell in love with this Art Nouveau range of colours the moment I saw it. It's just beautifully sort of vintage inspired, really soft muted tones. It's very me. I absolutely loved it, but it's taken me what, 3 years to actually get myself a set, and I'll be honest, I didn't buy this. I only have this set because my husband bought it for me as a present, and the reason I held off was because they are different from watercolours, and I was predominantly a watercolour artist for a long time. And I kind of told myself that if I was going to spend money on art supplies, it should be on watercolours. And that if I was going to use art supplies, it should be watercolours and pencils and the things that I already use. I should focus on improving my skills with those materials rather than trying out new ones. Really like these pinks. And I sort of felt that having lots of different art materials was not necessarily that it would confuse me, but that it would distract me from improving my skills in a certain area, that I didn't need to keep buying art materials. That wasn't going to make me a better artist. And then just recently, I kind of had a word with myself and reminded myself that before art was my job, if there were art materials that I saw that I wanted, I would treat myself to them. There'd be no reason not to get them. They would just be like a fun thing to play and experiment with. And it didn't matter what the outcome was. And I had to sort of remind myself that it's okay to have art materials that aren't part of my practice as an illustrator. Like, they're not the materials I use when I'm earning money, but they're just things that I enjoy playing around with in my spare time. Does that make sense? And so I think my husband was a little bit bored of me talking about how beautiful these paints were and never actually buying them, that he got them for me. And I'm so glad he did, because they're beautiful. That one's not going down very well on the paper, but I think maybe there's something on the paper, like maybe some hand cream or something off my skin on that bit of paper, because it feels a bit weird there. I have used these Gansai Tambi paints before. I had some that came in an art subscription box where every month you'd get a sort of selection of different art materials. So I'd already used them. I knew that I liked them, but they're just, as I say, different from watercolours. This one's very bright. That's not a colour that I would normally go for. What is that? Cobalt turquoise light. It's nice. Not sure how I'd use it, but I like it. And what I'm trying to do when I swatch these down is to get a little bit of variety in the area of paint that I'm laying down. So I've got a sort of lighter wash area and a area with more paint on it. And in a few places I've let the water sort of dripped, so you get these marks here, these blooms and things, just to see how they behave. Oh, I like this one. That's really nice, sort of dark, moody green. That's the shadow green. It's really beautiful. Okay, so I've swatched out all the colours. One of the things that you'll notice is how big these pans are compared to a traditional watercolour, either a full pan or a half pan. I don't have one of those with me for comparison, but a full pan of watercolour would be sort of less than half that size. It's hard to say exactly how deep that is, so you can't really compare one to the other though. The reason these pans are so big isn't because they're giving you lots of paint, it's because they were designed to be used with larger brushes. So a large brush can get in there and pick the paint up straight from the pan, compared to the way in which a traditional watercolour is used. It's also very difficult to compare one to the other because they'll vary in how pigmented they are. So it might be that you have to lay down much more of this compared to the watercolour to sort of fill the same area or achieve the same depth of colour, if that makes sense. Even comparing two different sorts of traditional watercolour is difficult. More premium brands will be much more highly pigmented than the cheaper student grade brands, and so they'll last much longer. You won't need as much paint to achieve the same results. I'd also say I don't know how light fast these are. They do claim to be light fast on their website, but at the price they are, I would want to test that for myself. But then again, if light fastness isn't an issue for you, then it doesn't matter. I don't sell my watercolour paintings or hang them up on my walls or anything like that. They tend to either be in my sketchbook or they get scanned in and used as part of an illustration, and so whether the paint fades over time isn't really a problem. So I decided right from the start that I wanted to do this picture a little bit differently than the way I normally use watercolours. I wanted to lay coloured pencils over the top of the paint, and I wasn't going to use the sort of line work that I would ordinarily use in my watercolours. And as I was laying down the paint, I tried to vary its application. So some areas are very watered down and thin, and other colours were laid down much thicker, just to sort of get a sense of how the paints behaved at different consistencies, how they flowed on the paper. I thought they might be a little bit more like gouache when used thick, but it's very hard to get an even application of colour, which you can do easily with gouache. I much prefer using these paints very watered down, like a traditional Western watercolour. Now overall I don't like this picture that I made, but it was a good little exercise to test out the paints and combine them with other materials. And while I don't paint much these days because I'm mostly working digitally, these paints are a great addition to my art supply stash, and having them to play around with in my sketchbooks is hopefully going to get me back into painting because I kind of lost my painting groove. Thanks for watching, and if you have any thoughts on how best to use these paints, or if you've got any experience with the Gansai Tambi paints, let me know in the comments.